I am happy to report that just around an hour ago, the last of 2,339 boxes left the container at the back of this facility and was taken into a workstation to be counted. As we speak, several of the stations have already closed, and there are a few stations still open working on the remaining boxes. Tabulation is proceeding of those boxes already counted, and I believe that that tabulation will be continuing until tomorrow. Importantly, and on this issue of tabulation, you'd recall the issue I raised and discussed with you last evening in relation to the decision to pause the tabulation of certain boxes on these for polling stations on the east coast of Demerara, which were counted, but they were found not to have certain documents in them. I'm happy to report that at the commission meeting this morning, as was scheduled, it was decided that those boxes will be tabulated and will form part of the result of this recount exercise arising from the statements of poll that were statements of recount that were generated from the recount of every single box of that 2,339. Now, at the meeting this morning, you'll recall my position that I publicly adumbrated, including last evening, is that those ballots have already been counted. They have already been marked by electors in a polling station. They went through, no doubt, all of the procedures that are concomitant with the issue, marking, and counting of a ballot. They were placed in sealed ballot boxes and kept in the custody of the Guyana Elections Commission and under the security of agents from all of the contesting political parties from the time election night until the time that they were counted here. Now, at the commission meeting today, I believe all of the commissioners agreed that the core issue was disenfranchisement, or the likelihood of disenfranchisement of electors as a consequence of any action that we will take in relation to those ballots. And even though all of the commissioners agreed that to deprive the electors of that franchise that they exercised on elections day by attending a polling station, submitting themselves to the process, being issued with a ballot, marking that ballot, putting that ballot into a ballot box, having that ballot counted, and having it recounted here, they ought not now, by virtue of a recount exercise, to have that franchise taken away from them. So, when the chairman this morning ruled in favor of allowing those ballot boxes that were recounted and for which statements of recounts were generated, and to have those statements of recount tabulated as part of the results for District 4, which will no doubt form part of the results of the entire country, then she was not voting in favor of one side. She was no doubt voting in favor of enfranchisement of electors who submitted themselves to the process and who have legally engaged in the process, and who through no fault of theirs stood under the threat by some strange reasoning of my colleague commissioners of having that franchise taken away from them. I am happy that good sense prevailed in the meeting and that a decision was arrived at which erred on the side of enfranchisement as opposed to disenfranchisement. Because and this is an issue that I raised in the meeting. The very Justice Singh, who now sits at the helm of this commission as its chairman, in the seminal case of Esther Pereira, the infamous elections petition case, ruled that a person's right to vote was a constitutional right. And to take away that person's right, as was attempted by the strange reasoning of not tabulating those persons' votes as part of the general recount and general results, was akin to taking away that person's right without even as much as offering them a hearing. And that could not be countenanced. So this argument about ruling in favor of one side, it is not ruling in favor of one side. It is ruling in favor of enfranchisement of the voters and not taking a position that will cause an elector, an elector who duly complied with all the aspects of the electoral process, to not to be disenfranchised because of the actions of some party or some some officer of GCOM through no fault of the elector. So, like I said, I am happy that good sense has prevailed and that has is the position. As I said, all of the boxes by now, probably one or two are left in there to be counted. Statements of recount, no doubt, will be generated for each of those boxes counted, and we're hoping that by as early as possible tomorrow, the tabulation process will continue and to conclusion, all things being equal. When that is done, the completed matrix will be handed to the contesting political parties for their concurrence, and hopefully shortly thereafter. I'm hoping the end of tomorrow, but I'm an eternal optimist. If not tomorrow, the next day, that the certified results from Region 4 can be presented to all the parties and by extension to the nation. Thereafter, as commissioners, and like I said, once more, by extension, this nation will eagerly await the report of the CEO, which is a two-part report pursuant to the order dated 4th of May, which is a summary of the recount results, which is basically a compilation of the 10 certificates of recount that are generated for each individual district. And then there's a concatenation of the observation reports, which also will be generated pursuant to compliance with that order. Once that is done, we move on to the next phase of considering those. And as you have seen, the order says that a declaration should come no later than 3 days after receipt of that report from the CEO. So that is it, ladies and gentlemen, the state of the track. I am happy that we have reached this stage of the proceedings. It would be remiss of me not to thank all of the persons, all of the unsung heroes who participated in this process, the medical personnel, and as I'm looking as we are going in, all the auxiliary staff, the staff of GCOM, the various agents, and last by no means least, all of you who have come out here day after day and suffered the elements. We owe you a debt of gratitude, as we owe to all the persons who have taken part in these proceedings. We now move on to the next phase, which hopefully will conclude sooner rather than later. It was our hope, as there were some difficulties this afternoon in starting at the prescribed 3 o'clock time. There were some difficulties with NCN in having a live feed out there, and that delayed the proceedings by about an hour. We tried to uh, convince the chief elections officer to have that time extended to compensate for that lost hour, but apparently he is constrained by the COVID-19 guidelines. I am hoping that within an hour and a half of work in the morning, that the tabulation team would be able to complete that and issue the tabulation report um, for the parties to check, and then a certificate should follow shortly thereafter.
Is there anything in the CEO's report or what the commission is expected to deliberate on has to do with the original declarations? I know some commissioners have said the report will focus on the recount and the issues or the results from the recount process. I'm particularly concerned about the Region 4 declaration and if the commission will deliberate on these issues.
So, Nazima, the short answer is, if we are to stick within the four corners of the order which governs the operation here, it is no. And if I'm to expand on that, you'd recall that shortly before this order was generated, and I think it was in the waning days of April of this year, I moved a motion at the commission to have those statements of poll, which ought to a reasonable person would assume that those statements of poll were the bases of arriving at that declaration. You'll recall me moving a motion. I reported it to you. I moved the motion to have those statements of poll presented to us. That has not been done. I have seen the declarations because they are posted on the GCOM's website. They have not yet; those have not been officially handed to me as well, but I've seen them posted on the GCOM's website. Clearly, the outcome of this proceedings do not add up, in particular to Region 4, as we're seeing displayed on the website.
But will these be challenged by the commission or deliberated at the commission, even outside of the report that is expected at any time?
I don't anticipate that. I don't anticipate it.
How will this affect the contempt charges that were brought against Mr. Mingo? Because whatever Mr. Mingo do is still a sharp focus of a lot of the observers' reports and so on.
I will not comment on the contempt proceedings that are before the courts, which Mr. Mingo faces, because that's a matter outside of the arena of GCOM in which I am not involved. I would prefer the lawyers who are involved in that proceedings, both for the persons making the allegations of contempt and the alleged contemptors in that regard. So I would prefer not to hazard an opinion on that. But insofar as the work of the commission, and insofar as the four corners of the recount order stand, I don't believe that is a necessary procedure at this time.
Mr. Barrage, to what extent does GCOM have the authority to set aside votes that cannot be considered valid for any or one reason?
To what extent?
Yes.
I would say to no extent, because that's the domain of the courts. If you look at all the wide-ranging powers, the panoply of powers that inure to the Guyana Elections Commission, as are contained in the Representation of the People's Act, the amendments thereto, Act number 15 of 2000, which is a wide-ranging, which gives sweeping powers to GCOM, including powers that we have exercised in the conduct of this recount. If you look at the articles of the Constitution, Article 161 in particular, which gives a whole host of powers to GCOM, nowhere in those bits of legislation and the Constitution to which I have referred have I seen an ability or a power or the authority or the wherewithal presented to the Guyana Elections Commission to do so. GCOM, in all of its powers, is still limited by the law. And the law states the specific instances by which a ballot can be invalidated And we have been giving due credence to those tenets of the law during this process, including ballots not marked for want of official mark, etc. We have been doing that here. So the short answer once more, it is my respectful view that the Guyana Elections Commission does not have that power to invalidate ballots or votes cast in favor, validly cast in favor of any party.
So then you're saying, as flawed as a process may appear to be, the commission must make a declaration, even on the face of it, that the votes may appear to have been validly cast. Right? That's what you're saying?
Yes, because the agency vested with that authority is the High Court, which has specific jurisdiction pursuant to the elections law, validity of election. I'm not sure, the Validity of Elections Act, to deal with that, not the Guyana Elections Commission.
But isn't that put the commission in a difficult position?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because the commission can only act within the four corners of its powers. It can't act outside of that. It can't act ultra vires of its powers.
So, Mr. Gunraj, with that in mind, will it put a restriction on the commission then to declare the first result as of March 13, that is in abeyance?
I don't understand your question.
You just said that the commission is bound to make a declaration, even in the face of evidence of, or alleged evidence of fraud. Right? The second declaration, it was said that that declaration was flawed as well. That's the reason why it was placed in abeyance, so that they will come to provide that. So it's either results can be
No,
declared.
no. You said they will come to provide what?
The second declaration on March 13th, right, it was alleged that it was fraudulent. So they arrived at the conclusion to do a recount. The recount, there is alleged evidence of fraud again, and you're saying that in spite of all of that,
Guided this recount process. And I believe if you look at what the order says and the purport and intent of the order, your question will be answered. It is because of those circumstances that you have just adumbrated, it has become necessary for us to engage in a process that has taken us 33 days so far. And it is in that regard I am saying that the commission is bound to declare results based on the recount exercise that we have just wanted on.
How do you subscribe to the view that at least 84,000 ballots are considered, like the victim of electoral fraud? How do you subscribe to that?
I don't know what the source of that information is and how it has arrived at, but I would want to reject that out of hand, and I will not subscribe to that.
On what basis are you rejecting it?
On what basis are they saying that it is based on electoral fraud?
But on what basis are you rejecting it? You are
No
part of the
evidence,
commission here.
no evidence, Dennis, as late as this morning when the commission met, has been brought to the commission to support any contention of fraud before that has been alleged on the numerous instances. Absolutely none has come to the commission.
All through with the observation reports, nothing you say can hold.
Absolutely no evidence to substantiate any of the allegations that have been contained in any of the observation reports that have so far been brought to the tabulation room has been presented to the commission on which I sit, a commission which met as late as 10:30 this morning.
So, Mr. Panraj, will you be able to say to us then if GCOM is at this moment in possession of all its statutory documents that were supposed to be present in those boxes, right, as the report is completed?
I am not the statutory officer charged with responsibility or the custodian of those documents. The person who is the custodian of those documents by virtue of statute is the chief elections officer, and I prefer that you direct that question to him.
But don't you think that rightfully those ballots ought to have been reconciled before they were actually tabulated?
This is a recount exercise. This is a recount exercise. Nothing else. A recount exercise.
So
And-
then what are you reconciling them with? For instance, the 29 boxes, what are you reconciling them with? Do those documents serve a purpose?
Those are ballots that are validly cast pursuant to the law. When you look at what the law considers to be a valid ballots, all of those pass the test. And as a consequence, the validity is not in question, and as a consequence, there is nothing to invalidate them. Absolutely nothing. And I believe that I always come out here and I say that I'm part of a commission that subscribes to democracy. Even when a decision I don't agree with, I criticize the decision, but I stand by the decision. So a decision has been made, and that decision is being carried out as we speak.
Or would you have liked, in the interest of transparency, to see these documents be in these boxes so you can match them with actual ballots? Would you have liked that?
You know how many things I would like, Dennis?
No, but
No. In a perfect world, you know how many things I would have liked? I would have liked Claremont Mingo, the returning officer, to do the right thing and declare proper results based on the statements of poll that I have seen. But he hasn't done that, and that was 3+ months ago. But you know what? We are here now. We are here now, having gone through this torturous activity that this nation's anxiety has been piqued as a result of. And as a consequence, those anomalies as you may want to describe them as, that present themselves in the ballot boxes, is 2,339 persons who were in charge of this process at the local level, presiding officers. You had additional staff, etc. If you look around this tent, each of you may choose to address the way you operate your different media houses and carry out your tasks in different ways, even though you might all have received similar or the same training.
Mr. Goodrich, you haven't answered the question.
As a consequence, I would have loved to open and see 2,339 perfect boxes. But I'm a realist, and that has not happened. But that ought not to be the basis upon which an elector who has duly complied with the process, everything that he was required to do as an elector, which I've detailed several times moments ago. He has done everything. He or she has done everything. And as a consequence, you are telling me that that elector ought to be disenfranchised because of the act or omission of a presiding officer or a staff of GCOM? I don't agree with that.
But
I
then
certainly
in
don't.
this whole vein, should GCOM systems be effective and efficient enough to ensure that you do not find yourself in this position where questions are raised about the validity of ballots, whether they match what
And
is
that
in
is
the
why, Dennis, there are laws that allow all of those investigations and inquiries into that to be done. And it is called the National Elections Validity of Elections Act. If I'm quoting it, I'm sure I'm quoting the name incorrectly, but it has Validity of Elections Act inside.
Are you
in
hiding
the-
behind the law to say that, look, we ought not to be raising too many questions about these 29 boxes?
I don't have anything to hide behind or in front of.
because you keep quoting the law,
But the law is all, the
you're
majesty,
not dealing with the reality of your perception.
the majesty of the law
Is
is the
there.
only thing that we have to take shelter under, whether we are using it to carry out a process or to protect against wrongs. That is all we have. As citizens, individually, or as organizations collectively, or the state. That is all there is. And if we choose to cherry pick and which one we subscribe to and which ones we don't subscribe to, then the rule of law, which we all want to protect us, will be broken down, Dennis.
On the other hand, in Sapphire, you don't want to accept those.
Why don't we want to accept them?
Well, there was a question about the stamping and
Yes.
all of that.
What does the law say about that? The law says that a ballot that is devoid of an official mark ought to be deemed invalid for want of official mark. So it is the same law. It is the same law that I want to rely on, Dennis, that for protection, I'm relying on for a defense. The law says,
But Mr. Gunraj, isn't it the same deficiency?
The law
Isn't it the
says-
same administrative deficiency that you're looking at? On the one hand, you're using it to your advantage, and on the other hand, you're using it to...
I don't agree with you. Because the law specifically says,
Isn't it a functional, wasn't it a functional problem whereby those ballots, half of them were not stamped in Sapphire?
You know-
by very people who work at the polling stations, as opposed to those who were in the 29 places but didn't put the documents inside. On the one hand, you want those to be invalidated, but you want these to be validated.
it is not a matter of what I want to be validated or what I don't want to be validated. It is what the law determines to be valid or not. There's, in fact, when that matter was raised at the commission, we have asked for, we don't have, with the exception of perhaps Sapphire and Plindora, which, quite interestingly, the two major stakeholders in this process have different benefits from those two. Because one box was predominantly in favor of the People's Progressive Party Civic, and another one was in favor of the APNU plus AFC. Sapphire and Plindora. I'm hearing tons of reference to Sapphire, but I'm not hearing reference to Plindora, which is right up the road here, that had the exact same circumstance, which acted, if you want to call it a detriment, against another stakeholder, averse to the one, or different, quite different from the one at Sapphire. But those are the two that we have notice of. There were several instances, and we're following the law. We are following the law. There is nothing in the law that invalidates the ballots cast in those 29 odd ballot boxes that are the subject of this discussion. Nothing.
But they validated those in Sapphire. That's
Because the law said that.
Mr. Conrad, I just want to understand. We said that the mistakes, I guess, of presiding officers in different places that cause these documents not to be in the ballot boxes. How should
I didn't call it a mistake,
Okay,
because
not a mistake.
as we speak, the chief elections officer has undertaken to do an investigation to reveal why those documents are not in there. So I wouldn't label it a mistake.
So an investigation is pending?
That is pending.
Understood.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.